first-time home buyers out there, perhaps second or third-time home buyers, you guys will know that in the back of your mind, when you're looking for your dream house, there's probably a checklist in the back of your mind that has probably 100 things on it that you're looking for in your dream house. Well, you know, the reality of the matter is you're never going to find a house with all of those things on your checklist, but you know, if you look around and you're patient, you'll find a house that has most of those things on your checklist. So, of course, you could always build your dream house if you have the money and get everything you want, but quite oftentimes you're going to have to settle for a happy median. Now, when I was in the housing market, there were a million things going through my mind, a million things that I really wanted in a house. A couple of things that I got on my checklist with this house: a nice big garage for a nice workshop, that was definitely a big plus. Also, a 200 amp electric service, which you can always add on in the future, but you know, it may get pretty costly to do that. So I'm happy that this house has a 200 amp electric service that allows me to run all my equipment, and it leaves room for future electrical projects that I have around the house. Also, here's a big one. This house has a manual generator transfer switch, and for me, having a secondary power source is critical. The storm that really set in my mind that it's critical to have a backup power source was Hurricane Sandy. At that time, I was living in a fairly urban environment, and it took upwards of 3 weeks to get our power restored. Which, you know, I don't mind living without power for a little while, but the issue becomes I live in the Northeast, and when it gets cold out, you need to keep the house warm in order to prevent pipes from freezing. Thankfully, Hurricane Sandy happened in a time where, you know, temperatures weren't dropping below freezing, but imagine if we got a storm where we lose power for a week or two and the temperatures don't get above 30 degrees. That's bad news bears here, because that's going to burst some pipes, it's going to cause extensive damage to the plumbing, and it's just going to be a nightmare. So it's critical, living in the backwoods here, that we have a secondary power source in order to keep the home heated and warm and prevent pipes from freezing. So with this transfer switch, this is a manual transfer switch, meaning that if the power goes out, somebody has to come out here, you have to wheel the generator out of the house, you have to manually turn on these breakers, and there's a proper way to do that, and that'll turn on the power. There's no natural gas lines out here, but if you live in an area that has natural gas supplied on the street, or if you have natural gas going to your house, you can get a Generac generator, and you can also get an automatic transfer switch. So what that means, if the power goes out, you know, the transfer switch will automatically kick on, but I'm blabbering on now. Anyway, I was fortunate in that I was able to negotiate this generator in the house price. You know, I said, you know, we'd like the generator included in the house, and the guy was moving to Florida, so it was no big deal. But from the story I got, this generator hasn't been run since Hurricane Sandy, ironically. So today I'm going to take apart this generator a bit. We'll drain out the fuel. We'll take off the carburetor and see what kind of condition that is, and we'll see if we can get this baby running, and I'd really like to give it a test. Alright, now that I got this thing dusted off, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the fuel tank off. I'm going to drain out the fuel because I have no idea how old this is. Commonly, when an engine sits for a while, people make the mistake of leaving the same gas in there and running it through, and then, you know, if there's any globs of crud in the fuel tank as it is, you know, and that goes through the carburetor, it'll really gum up the carburetor. So best thing to do is to drain out the fuel. We'll take off the carburetor, see what's in there, and we'll give it a try and see what happens. Check the engine oil, of course. Probably a good idea to change that, but one thing at a time. Make sure the fuel shutoff is off, which it's off. Now this is the fuel line that goes in the carburetor. There's a little clamp, so I'm just going to take a regular pair of pliers and try and work this clamp up. And from here, it's a good idea to have a little catch pan out, because when I take this line off, it's probably going to drop a little bit of fuel. Really don't want to use pliers on it, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get this off here by hand. I'm going to have to use some pliers. Just be careful, try not to damage the line. Then we can remove the fuel tank, which doesn't feel like there's that much fuel in here, which is a good thing. After sitting for many years, the engine is clearly very dusty, which I've dusted off all the loose dust that I've been able to. Don't have the air compressor hooked up, otherwise I'd blow this out. So just going to take some simple green Max and we'll see if we can clean this thing up a little bit better before we take apart the carburetor. Still quite filthy, but it's a little bit cleaner. Now I'm going to take apart the carburetor, and that's going to start with these two 8mm bolts. Air filter, pretty clean. In the past 8 years of owning my Cobalt tools, I've never had an opportunity to use my 4mm 1/4" drive socket, and today is going to be the day. So for these carburetor bolts, just so happens that the 4mm socket is a perfect fit. Now, the choke control lever is fixed to this butterfly valve in the carburetor, which is attached to this outer tin for the air filter. I'm not 100% sure if this comes off, so what I'd recommend is just backing these off a little bit, unseat the carburetor, and then we'll see if we can take these off the rest of the way. Alright, let's see if we can pop off these throttle control push rods. From here, I should be able to slide this out the rest of the way. There we are. So you guys saw that I took this whole assembly out in one piece, which I didn't have to do that. I kind of had a feeling I didn't have to do that, but I wasn't sure if I was going to break anything. So the problem I was having was this choke control lever runs through this air filter housing, and I was pulling up on it pretty firmly and it wouldn't pop off. I also shined a flashlight down in here, this little hole right here, before I decided to pull up on it, and I didn't see a screw, so that was also throwing me off. Anyway, after I was able to bring it up on the table, see, obviously it's apart now, but I just worked this back and forth and using my pick tool to get in here, and I was able to pry this little choke control lever up and off, and there's almost like a little barb system in here, similar to what's on a fishing hook to catch fish. So it's just a matter of patience and slowly working this off, and you'll get that off there without breaking anything. Now, let's dive into the carburetor. Pretty clean. Pretty clean indeed. Alright, now let's reassemble this carburetor. So first things first, gasket's already on here and that's in pretty good condition. Probably would have been a smart idea to get a carburetor rebuild kit. I'm thinking the easiest thing to do now would be to connect these throttle rods while the carburetor is off. Next, I'll reinstall these two bolts. Start them by hand, of course. And if memory serves me correctly, we're going to be looking for a 4mm socket. Next, I'm going to reinstall the air filter housing. Now, there's a tube that comes from, I believe this is called the PCV valve. And if memory serves me correctly, any unwanted gases that collect in the crankcase from blow-by from the piston rings, that is expelled from the engine through the PCV valve, and it travels through this tube, and then it goes in front of the air filter, and then those unwanted gases are reburned through the engine in an attempt to produce cleaner emissions. So first things first, I'll try and put this tube back in this PCV valve here. Okay, I got that tube in there. I'll line this up with the holes. By the way, there is a gasket on the back side of this. Just make sure your gasket's in good condition. These are 17 mil. Started them by hand, of course. From here, I have my little choke lever, and I'm gonna go ahead and put this back up here. That's functioning properly. All right, now I'm gonna put the air filter back on. I'm pretty certain this is the original air filter that came from the factory, and it's in really good condition. I don't think this engine has seen much use at all, which is definitely a good thing. So, put it in there like so. Then the air filter cover. Now, it's important that you put this in the proper orientation. If you look on the bottom here, this is where the air comes in, and you want to make sure that's facing down. A good way to remember that is simply put the writing in the proper orientation. You have 2 bolts for this cover. Start these by hand and then tighten them down. Now there is a plastic cover that I was about to put on next, and that goes right beneath PCV valve, like so. But who knows if the oil on this machine was ever changed, which I seriously doubt it. If you look down here, here's the oil fill / dipstick. So before I put that on, I would say now is an opportune time to change the engine motor oil. And to do that, first thing I'm going to do is go in the manual that was included with this generator. I'm going to find how much oil gets placed in this machine and what weight. According to the manual here, this generator requires 0.8 liters of engine oil, and the recommended oil is 5W30, which is good for me because I have 2 extra jugs of this lovely 5W30 full synthetic motor oil, and that should have this generator running like a champ. You just gotta love engineers. They put the oil drain plug right here, but if I take that plug off, it's really gonna shoot right on the tire, so it'll only take an extra minute or 2 to take this tire off. I'm thinking, just got a little C-ring here, C-clip. But I really think it should be a requirement for engineers to work on the products they engineer themselves. Like, they couldn't move this oil drain plug like 3 inches to the right here. I don't think that would have been much of a deal, or created some type of way to reroute this oil drain perhaps over to the right some so you don't have to take off the tire. Whatever. Quite dirty. Alright, now I'm going to put this protective cover back on. There's 2 studs come off the PCV valve. Easiest thing to do is to put the plastic cover through those 2 studs first. There's a 10mm bolt down here, which we got to tighten up. And now there's just these 2 11mm nuts. Alright, the only thing left to do now is reinstall the fuel tank, hook up the fuel lines, put some fresh gas in here. Maybe at a later date I'll change out the battery in this thing because it does have an electric start feature, and it does have a built-in battery tender, which I thought that was interesting and a nice feature. And of course, in an upcoming video, I'm going to simulate a power outage in which I shut off the main power supply to the house and we'll hook up the generator and see what it actually does, what it powers, if it's functioning properly, of course. And also, on another note, the fuel I'm going to be putting in here is going to be treated with Stable brand fuel stabilizer, the red one, and according to the bottle it says it'll keep fuel fresh up to 2 years. Heard nothing but good things about them, but we will just have to see for ourselves here.